Hi, I'm Phil Castle. A little while ago, I did a tutorial talking about modulus, and we were doing some special calculations on that. And I thought I'd follow that one up with this particular tutorial where we're going to try and calculate time. And this is if you've been given a number of seconds, so you have like 4,000 seconds or 123 seconds or something like that. How do you convert that into hours, minutes, and seconds? And using the modulus, we can help out with that calculation, and that's just one way of doing it. Let's take a look at setting up this project. So we'll go to our presentation, and I want to look at some of the variables that are found inside of Captivate that deal with time, and I find that there are probably not enough variables that we need to use. So we have the CP info current time, and that returns the hours, minutes, and seconds on the person's computer. We also have CP info current hour and CP info current minute. And keep in mind that with the hour, it's a 24-hour clock. So if it's 3 in the afternoon, you're going to get a number of 15 coming back to you. The other variable that I found was the CP info elapsed time MS. And this returns the milliseconds. So it's going to be in a number in the thousands, because 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. So if you spend 60 seconds, then you're looking at 60,000 milliseconds spent on a section. So it gets to be a large number, and that's actually a good thing because we can then use a little bit of math to calculate specific times. But I'm not going to worry about using these times because I want to use other methods of being able to calculate time. So what are some of the uses of calculations of time, and why would you use this inside of a Captivate project? And one is if you want to take how much time does a learner spend on a slide? How long are they on that particular slide? We can also look at how much time they spent in an activity. And if their time is very short in an activity and they get a good score with the activity, then they obviously know the content well. Another thing is you can have like time in a section. How long were they in a particular section? So I can start and stop a timer for a section as well. And if you have 10 slides and they get through that content in 15 or 20 seconds, it's very obvious they did not spend the time reading the content or getting to interact with the content. They just kind of blew by very quickly. So you can use this as a hint as to what the learner is doing and how much time they're spending on the content. So we can look at creating a little project that I made that calculates seconds. So I would type in the number of seconds, and then it would spit out some time that's been formatted. So I could format the time to hours, minutes, and seconds, or make a sentence, and that's exactly what I've done. So if we take a look, before we get into the code here, let me show you the presentation or the project that I created, and it looks something like this. So if I punch in 1,234 and then press the enter key, it tells me that's 3 hours, 2 minutes, and 34 seconds. If I punch in the number 250 and press the enter key, it tells me it's 4 minutes and 10 seconds, but there's no hours in there anymore. If I press 384, tell me 1 hour and 24 seconds, and there's no minutes appearing in the content. And that's what I want to show you is in the code. It looks something like this, and I recognize that this would be overwhelming for many people, but let's break it down one line at a time and see if we can get this to make a little more sense. So let's take a look at this first line of code, and we take this txt_num, and this is the text entry variable that's inside of Captivate. And what this whole line of code does is window.cp API interface get variable value. And what it does is it just basically takes that content from Captivate and saves it inside of the JavaScript variable. So the variable now is a JavaScript variable. The next line we have down here, and this is something that I've worked on and demonstrated in other tutorials, but we'll talk a little more about it. Let's zoom into this and look at what this line does. Now happens to be what we got inside of Captivate. When you typed in the number in Captivate, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's what's saved inside of now. So let's assume for the rest of our coding that now has a value of 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we have this division, and we divide it by 360 because we need to find out how many hours there are. So 60 seconds times 60 minutes gives you 1 hour. So that's where the 360 came from. if we take a look at now, at 1234 divided by 360, it gives us a number like this, 3.427778. And then this math.floor, as I mentioned in other tutorials, that's what it does, it truncates or cuts off at the decimal point. So you can see where the decimal point is after we do the division, and what it does, it just cuts it off. So after this code has been run, our, or HH, is going to have a value of 3. All right, let's go back to our code, and now let's take a look at the next line. And we have this variable hold equals now modulus 360. And remember, the modulus gives you the remainder. So what we'll want to do is, after we run that 360, so basically we're removing all of the content for the hours, because we know how many hours we have now. So you just want to know what's left over, and that's what we're doing with hold. Hold is going to hold on to the value that's left over. And in this case, there's 154 seconds that are left over. So just kind of keep that in mind. The next line we have down here is hold divided by 60. So that's 154 divided by 60, and that gives you a value of 2.5667. Now remember, when we looked at the 2 lines ago, that math.floor truncates at the decimal point. So that minute, mn variable, is going to have a value of 2. So we do the division, and then we have the value of 2. Now what we need to do is get the seconds, and this is actually pretty simple, because we have 154 divided by 60, and you get a remainder of 34. It's not how many times does 60 go into 154, it's what's left over after you've done the division. So in this case, SS has a value of 34. Now here's a really kind of complex line, and again, let's just break this down in a little bit, and I'm showing it this line because you may, if you have other developers doing some of this coding work for you, you may get something back like this. So hopefully this kind of explains a little bit about what's going on. I'm going to focus most of my attention on this part here at the end. Think of this as an if statement. If HH is greater than 0, so I've set up an if statement, and we know that HH from our previous calculations has a value of 3, so we know that this statement is going to be true. So if it's true, then you're going to display something like this, 3 hours, because HH is 3, and then you have the plus sign and then the word hours within quotes. So if it's true, it'll display 3 hours. Now, if HH has no value, let's say 0, then you display nothing. This is the false part. So if it's true, you display that middle part, and if it's false, you display the end part. So again, a little complex, but it's very handy, very good for if you want to customize your display, your content based on the values of a variable. The next line that we have down here, basically this section is the same as what we had the previous line, so I won't go through and explain that. But I do want to focus a little bit on this. You see that plus equals that we have. That's the same as saying txt result equals txt result plus whatever we have for our minutes, mm. To simplify that a little more, think of it this way. Let's say you have a variable x, and x has a value of 1. If I was to say x plus equals 1, that will give me 2. So it's the same as writing x equals x plus 1. So it's just a shorter way of writing it. It actually requires less processing power on the CPU. You'll often find a lot of developers will write code like this. So if you come across some code like this, just understand that it's just saying x equals x plus 1. You're just adding to what is already inside of that variable. Final line that we have down here, again, we have that plus equals, and we're just adding the seconds to it. Now, if there are 0 seconds, it's still going to pop up and say 0 seconds. I didn't bother doing the putting that if statement in there, or that immediate if statement. We'll just leave it as is, try and simplify what we're doing here. The final line that we have is, this is where we copy the JavaScript variable from txt result, and we save it back into the Captivate variable txt feedback, and that was the feedback that you would see up on the screen. So we're just basically copying this back in, and that's how we get JavaScript and Captivate to talk to each other. So this basically is how I try and build this particular project, where you are calculating time. It's a handy thing to have, it's a good routine to have, and it can work inside of a web page as well as working inside of Captivate. So I hope this helps you out.